Mr. Mayor, good to see you.
Good to see you, Jane. We're hanging in there.
There's Bill. Mayor Oglesby. Getting close to a quorum here. Looks like we got one. Stan, your mugshot. There you go. There's the Stan I know.
Oh, God, a FORA meeting going on right now.
Hi, Josh.
Greetings, Frank.
I can leave it.
We got you there. Looks like we've got most of a quorum here. There's Mark Northcross coming in from his yurt up on the Eel River, looks like. Okay. Looks like we're in good shape. See, Marianne Carbone raised her hand.
Aha.
I'm being a troublemaker. I just wanted to see if you guys could see me.
Yes.
And now the trick is, can you unraise your hand so that when you raise it later, we'll pay attention to you.
There's
Nice.
Mary Adams. Great.
Okay, well, I think it is 2 o'clock.
Indeed.
So I am going to call to order the Thursday, April 9th, 2020 meeting of Port Order Reuse Authority Board of Directors. I think I will skip the Pledge of Allegiance for today. So be on your best behavior, everyone.
Just to your defense, we've tried that before and it's just come off too awkwardly. So we've started waving that for the
Okay,
COVID.
instead of waving the flag, we'll wave the pledge.
Right.
Okay, and then next item on our agenda is closed session. Council, do you want to talk to us about closed session?
Yes, board and public. I've decided there really isn't anything to report on the closed session item 3A, which is anticipated litigation. So we can defer that to another time.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we will move now past, and we're just going to waive another agenda item. We're not going to announce of any action taken in closed session since we didn't have closed session. And we'll move directly and speedily to acknowledgements, announcements, and correspondence. Mr. Executive Officer, do you have anything to report?
I have a few, and to Mayor Gunter's point, I won't keep us here all night, but I think there's so much to acknowledge. First, today marks our countdown clock of 82 days till the close of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority. So we're moving quick. Another announcement I have is that the DART Symposium, Drone Automation Robotics Technology, is retooling for an online offering. We were lined up to have quite a showing at CSUMB, but due to the situation at hand, we're now retooling for an online. So stay tuned for that. We've also received a couple correspondence, one from the Carpenters Union Local 605 regarding the master resolution that was shared with the board. We also received just before this meeting an email from Doug Yount with comments on the transition plan. So those have all been shared with the board, but by way of acknowledgements, I think just in the moment that we're in, I've seen some incredible examples, great examples of community response and resilience in the face of the coronavirus. And while this is not intended to be exhaustive because it would take all night, there are a few that have caught my eye and I would like to just acknowledge and mention here. The first is the team at MPUSD, PK Diffenbaugh and his team have done an incredible job of quickly pivoting to food delivery to the community and now taking on distance learning. And I know this is happening at campuses and education facilities around the country and the world, but I've been particularly impressed with what I've seen from them. Also, the Monterey County's actions and guidance in regard to the farm workers' safety. I think, it speaks to the essential workforce of our community and the service that we provide, that they obviously need to be made safe. And so taking action in that direction has been noticed. Also, just generally, the county and the city of Monterey in particular have done great job, in my opinion, in communicating the circumstances in our county and the administrative activity. I know Hans Uslar is gearing up for his morning chat, so he's getting ready for that. Also from the private sector, our new community members at Joby Aviation and Parallel Flight Technology, one of the drone companies incubating in our area, have pivoted quickly to producing personal protective equipment using their additive manufacturing capabilities and at meeting that need. And then a guy you all might recognize, Kevin Dayton, I think has been making a particularly impactful sharing of information and ideas in the current situation and thinking about the response. Those are just a few. I know there's been others. But finally, I'd also just like to acknowledge that the FORA staff and the consultant team, where we have, maintained a seamless continuity of progress towards our time-sensitive work. And I just want to acknowledge their professionalism and competence in taking that all on. It's really been impressive. And if I was somebody looking for incredibly competent and professional staff, able to manage under pressure and deal with the technology of the day and the circumstances of the day, I'd be taking a real close look at all these talented professionals. So with that, I'll let you get to the really important business of the day. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Josh. And definitely I want to add my thanks to the staff, and just even though Josh has now just invited everybody to pick off his staff, please don't do it before June 30th. They've got their hands full. All right, so we will move now to roll call, and Mr. Tregenza, would you give call the roll, please?
Sure. Supervisor Jane Parker,
Here?
Supervisor John Phillips,
Here.
Supervisor Mary Adams,
She's here. She might be having trouble with her. Yeah, she's there. Here, unmute. There you go, Mary. Say again.
Yes, thank you. Here.
Councilmember John Gagliotti,
Here.
Councilmember Frank O'Connell,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton,
Here.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa,
Here.
Mayor Ian Oglesby,
Here.
Councilmember John Wizard,
Here.
Mayor Marianne Carbone,
He's
Yep.
here.
Here.
There you go.
Sorry.
All right.
Mayor Joe Gunter,
Here.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield,
Here.
Councilmember Jan Reimers,
Here.
Catherine Moon, I think I saw her,
Here.
Colleen Courtney, Erica Parker, Debbie Hale, Dr. P.K. Diffenbaugh,
Here.
Steve Matarazzo,
Here.
Dr. Eduardo Ochoa,
Here.
Philip Sanders,
Here.
Bill Collins,
Here.
David Martin,
Here.
Lisa Reinheimer, and Keith Vandermotten.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you.
Chair, if I just might mention, Catherine Moon is here and replaces Kathleen Lee on Congressman Panetta's team. So welcome, Catherine. So Philip Saunders is
Thank
representing
you.
the U.S. Army. Works with Colonel Ford.
Welcome to you both. Okay, we will move then to the consent agenda. And those are items 7A through D. Are there any board members who would like to ask a question or make a comment or pull any item on consent for any reason? If you would raise your hand in the Zoom raise hand using that feature. All right, seeing no one raising their hand, I'll move to the public. Let's see, so the public would also be on Zoom. So if there's any member of the public who has a question or comment on any of the items on the consent agenda, if you would raise your hand using that function on Zoom, that would be great. I don't see any hands being raised, so I would then entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
This is Supervisor Phillips. Move consent.
I'll second. This is Alan Hoffa.
Thank you. We have a motion and second, and thank you for identifying yourselves for the scribe. Is there any discussion? Seeing no hands going up, all those in, oh no, roll call vote. Here we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Supervisor Jane Parker,
Aye.
Mayor Ian Oglesby,
Aye.
Supervisor Mary Adams,
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips,
Aye.
Councilmember Frank O'Connell,
Yes.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa,
Yes.
Councilmember John Wizard,
Aye.
Mayor Joe Gunter,
Aye.
Councilmember Janet Reimers,
Aye.
Councilmember Gagliotti,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton,
Aye.
Mayor Marianne Carbone,
Aye.
and Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. We'll move now to our business items. This is agenda item 8, and we will start with the mid-year budget and CIP.
Yeah.
And
So for anyone who may wish, all of the presentations that we're giving are currently on the FORA website here, A, B, C, and D. And so I will ask Helen Rodriguez to lead us through this item. I'm going to pull up the presentation here and share my screen so that we can get through that. Give me one moment here.
Josh, do you want me to just share my screen?
Oh, sure. If you got it, yep, great. Okay, I'll stop sharing mine, and you can share yours.
Hi, hopefully everyone can see the screen well.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Josh. Thank you, Chair. Welcome, everyone. This is the mid-year budget, and this year it's a little different than prior years. We have decided, because this is the last and final budget we're presenting it in combination with the CIP budget. So everything will all be combined. So let's start off. This is the mid-year budget, and if you look on the packet, there is attachments A, B, C, and D, which are a little more in depth. And so I'm going to be just doing a brief overview of what's already in your packet. So in here, as you can see, the first column is the approved 1920 budget. And then we have the mid-year budget on the very far right-hand corner, and the variances right in the middle. So for the revenues, as you can see, the revenues have decreased by $2.4 million, primarily with a reduction in development fees. And the reason this is being reduced is currently, as of March 31st, we only received 2.945, and we have not received anything new to date. So that's where we're sitting, and it is the most conservative, excuse me, let me go back. It is the most conservative prediction we have at this moment. As for property taxes, it's slightly higher by roughly $375,000. This is based on the first installment that we received, of which was 2.1 million, and we typically receive about 70% of that, which would be another 1.4 million, thus roughly 3.6 million. 1.3 of this goes to the general fund, and the rest of it goes to the development for CIP projects. Moving on to that's a total revenues of $8.9 million. And moving on to the expenditures, we are at $27,333,000, an increase of roughly $7 million. And the reason for that is because we are now transferring all projects, last projects that we can out, and expending everything we can out to the various lead agencies as assigned by the board. All these CIP projects have been discussed with the various jurisdictions, and we'll go further into that in a couple more slides. Having said that, we're going to be expending $18.4 million of the $45 million that we have in beginning fund balance, leaving us a fund balance of $27.5 million. Of this $27.5 million, you can see there is a request to commit or assign $6.5 million. Currently, roughly $7 million of that is sitting in the Section 115 trust. $1.5 million was recommended by the Finance Committee, given the current state of the market and current liabilities based on our last CalPERS valuation with a liability of roughly $6 million to $8 million. So they wanted to fund it to the higher end. Obviously, there'll be a caveat to that. Any shortfall should be covered by future property taxes, and any surplus to be distributed based on the TPIA formula. Additionally, there is $17 million that has been set aside for the habitat management based on the $3.6 million of proceeds to date that we're going to be receiving. So that's currently sitting at $70,075,499. So that leaves us, FORA, with roughly $1.9 million of funds that have not been assigned to any obligation, liability, or is unreserved totally. Here again, this is just a quick summary. We spoke about this. Total revenues, 8.9, expenditures, 27.3 million, revenue over expenditures or use of fund, 18.4 million. And again, we're back to our ending fund balance of $27.5 million. And again, just itemization of how that fund balance is allocated and committed. So other budget items, one of the things that's on the fund balance is the request for the 1.5 million. And again, the caveat here is that any shortfall will be covered by future property tax FORA would otherwise receive, and any surplus to be distributed as per the TPIA. So now we're moving on to the CIP budget here. And as you can see, I broke this down between two slides because the slide was rather long and it would have been extremely small. So we'll start off first with the development fees. The dedicated revenues to the development fees are obviously the development fees, 2.9 million. Property tax allocation, $2.7 million here. Please ignore that note on the side. We had already reduced it based on the, excuse me, go back. Oops. This has already been reduced by the Finance Committee. Originally, we had predicted it at 3.6, but then as we got closer to the presentation, this it didn't seem like it was happening, so it was reduced to 2.9. So please disregard that assumption there. The property taxes is 2.3 million. Again, the caveat here is whether or not we will receive that second installment in May versus July. And having spoken to the county, they have indicated that in all likelihood it will be received in May. And then miscellaneous revenue of 35 million for total revenues of 5.2 million. Project expenditures, again, this has been discussed. All these numbers have been discussed with the various jurisdictions involved. And so for transportation transit, there's 10.2 million. Transportation contingency, 1.1 million. The water augmentation, 2.2. And then we have a small amount for permits and stuff. And then we have the FORA consultants, 1.7 million. These are to close out contracts and so forth, and to help transfer all these funds here. And then we have other expenditures, 1.1 million, which covers the staff costs, general office costs, legal, and so forth. So total expenditures is $16.4 million, and that leaves us with a net use of funds of $11.1 million, of which then you have 17 million set aside for the HCP, which leaves us a balance on the development fees of $562,000 available for whatever the board decides to use thereafter. For the building removal fund, which is the land sale fund here, this number here, if you noted on the budget that I presented earlier, I did not have the bond proceeds and I did not have the bond proceeds allocation. And the reason for that was it was a moving target, and net-wise, whatever we get in is also going to go out, so that would have no effect on the fund balance. So it was not included again on the budget, but for this presentation it is. Based on current, the last conversation we had with NHA, it was roughly $30 million in proceeds we are looking at. Again, if the market obviously comes back up, that could be a lot higher. Otherwise, there's no other revenues for building removal. Projects to complete and finalize here, we have the stockade, $2 million. We have the MCP settlement, $3 million that's already been expended. And then we have consultant fees, about roughly $619,000, regulatory fees, and then general office of $392,000 for LaSalle, and that leaves us with a unreserved fund balance of $1.3 million. So for the CIP, the 103,000 and the 562, that's the $1.89 million that we have available in the CIP funds. So what we're asking the board today is to approve the fiscal 1920 mid-year CIP budget with the revenues of $5.3 million and expenditures of $22.5 million, 16.4 in the debt fee and 6.1 in the building removal. And then we're also asking the board to approve the 1920 general budget, which includes both the general and the ESCA fund, which is 3.7 million in revenues and 3.7 in general expenditures and 1.7 in next ESCA expenditures. Additionally, we're asking the board to approve the 1.5 million general fund reserve to be set aside for CalPERS termination fund, exclusive of the 7 million that's already set aside in the section 115 trust, for a total of $8.5 million. And finally, we're asking the board to adopt the FY 1920 mid-year general and CIP budget as recommended by the Administrative, Finance, and Executive Committees. Do we have any questions?
I'll ask board members to raise their hands, and if members of the Finance Committee would like to speak first, that would be great. I see that Director Morton has her hand up, so go right ahead.
Just Helen, how does item 4 on this slide differ from 1 and 2? That slide you just had up about the actions.
Usually what we do is we approve it's really not a difference, but in the past, the way they've had it is they want to approve the mid-year CIP budget because there are additional revenues and additional expenditures. So that's, I mean, technically it is the same as 4, but
okay, then the other question that I had was on the slide where you talked about the set aside for the PERS obligation, and you said if there's a deficiency, it will be paid by tax increment, and if there's an excess of set aside funds, it would be distributed pursuant to the transition plan implementing agreement formulas. We don't have a transition plan implementing agreement being circulated for all of us to have in front of our bodies. So if in fact there is no transition plan implementing agreement, what is the formula for redistribution of funds?
That's a correction. That would be in the 2020 transition plan, not the TPIA. That's a
typo, I'm sorry.
Right.
Okay, so that appears in a couple of locations, so that would be the revision.
Yes.
Okay, because
that's also in the board.
And then, yes?
No, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't in the board report.
That should be in the transition plan that the board will consider today.
So approval of the budget would be any excess funds would be dispersed as set forth in the transition plan that will be adopted.
Right.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then just I know in the slide that you had the CIP expenditures, which I know is on 2 pages. The first of those pages, you just collapsed the columns, but the breakdown is as specified in what you distributed to us. There was no changes?
No, there was no changes in attachment D. That is correct.
Okay, and then I just wanted to clarify on, it's page 25 of the staff report where you have legal consultants, FORA, I think it's the legal, stockade building removal consultants, surplus 2 building consultants, and FORA general legal CIP consultants. The question that I have is, are those numbers that are cumulative, or are those numbers that we're anticipating being expended between now and June 30th?
The 25,000 is the CEQA consultant. And all these numbers are the expenditures to be just for this fiscal year. So this is through June 30, 2020 only. So effective July 1st, 2019 to June 30, 2020.
Okay, and so the surplus 2 building removal consultants, that was all within the amount of the amount of funds that we set aside for Seaside, which was 5-point-some million, correct?
I would have to defer to Christy. Christy, are you on the line?
Okay.
I
So, Member Morton, I'm trying to make sure I understand your question. The monies that are out there for the surplus 2 were actually allocated in 18, CIP 18, and we are managing the project through completion with those funds. The legal funds are not accounted for in the CIP budget, though. And as the board members know, there's a legal action.
Okay, so that was my question, is that in 2018, there was an allocation of funds, which was 5-point-something million is my recollection.
Correct.
Correct?
Yes.
And so these funds are within that 5-point-whatever million it was in 2018 and are not additions.
I've got to do a quick check on that one, and I will get that answer to you. But I believe so. Save the legal fees. And I did think that's important, is that the legal fees were not part of the construction funds allocated to the project.
Okay.
So that contract was let and was executed, and now we're just trying to finalize it. As you know, there was an issue with the contractor.
Right, but the board approval was a set dollar amount to blight removal for the city of Seaside, for structures within Seaside. I'm just trying to confirm this is not another $500,000 on top of that 5.2 million or 5.5 million, whatever it was that was approved.
No, I don't believe it is.
Okay, that's what I'm just trying to clarify. Thank you for answering my question.
Thank you. And I see that Director Hale has her hand up. Your turn. Debbie Hale, did you want to speak?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. I just had a couple of questions about the transportation section of the CIP. I'm just trying to look at them at the same time, if it would be possible to put that screen back up. I was just curious, the other under that, I may have missed what that is for. So if you go to the list of projects, there we go. The 1.121 total other, what is that?
So the 1.21 total other expenditures, those are the FORA, general FORA costs for all the rents, our staff, our legal costs, and so forth.
Okay, so that's the percentage. Essentially, that's an overhead cost that's charged, probably mostly already been expended.
Yes.
Okay, and then, and then going back to the detailed sheet, you had something on the the Eucalyptus Road project. I was just curious, does the way you can put that in as contingency mean anything? And which jurisdiction is taking on that project?
Seaside is taking on that project.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Okay,
Just
thank
a
you.
quick clarification, that was a repair to a project that was completed?
Yes.
So that's why it was put under contingency.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other board members with questions at this point? I see Director Wizard.
And Director Hoffa had his hand up.
Oh, did he? Oh, I'm sorry. It wasn't showing on my.
Chair Parker, this is John Wizard. I'll yield to Mr. Hoffa since he was first.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wizard. My question has to do with the approximately 1.9 million that's unallocated. What kind of restrictions, if any? So can we spend that on habitat? Can we spend it on building removal? Can we spend it on CIP? Can we give it out to one of the many of the requests we've had? So that's sort of one question. Are there any restrictions? And then number two, will we be voting today or giving direction today on how to allocate essentially the unallocated? Because I know we had requests from, I think, the county, from Seaside, probably Marina, from outside agencies and groups. And I just wonder, are we going to have a presentation of all those requests and a discussion so that we can allocate them as well? Thank you.
I think the thought is on all the available $1.9 million was to bring it back to the board sometime in the May board meeting. So we wanted to get through this budget so that everyone could see what was available, and then we would consolidate all the asks, and then the board can decide how they want to allocate those funds.
Okay, and then just in general, are these unallocated funds restricted or unrestricted or some of both?
I don't believe there's, I'll have to check. My only concern that I have is the one for the building removals, the $1.3 million that we have, which is part of the $1.8 million. And if it is really just restricted, I have to go and look back on what our master resolution says, and I'll have to defer also to John Giffen on that one. And
yeah.
But my understanding is once all projects are completed, there should be no restrictions.
Yeah, yeah, that's I concur with that. That's my understanding as well, is that it's board preference, board policy will direct how those funds get used. And we do have it on the calendar to bring back in May. As things develop, the closer we get to a real number, actual numbers, the better. And so, we'll bring it as soon as we can, and potentially even into the first meeting in June as a kind of later date. But the intention is to give you all ample time to consider and direct how the monies are distributed.
Director Wizard, your turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Helen. That was a little bit of an update from what we had at the Finance Committee, and I appreciate just refreshing my memory. I just wanted to ask a fairly direct question, I guess, and to get some clarity on whether FORA intends to resolve the legal matter with regard to Campus Town before FORA sunsets, and not pass on a bill to the city of Seaside for a FORA project that FORA bid out and FORA paid for.
I think that would be a question for John.
Sure. We're set for mediation on that case, and it's a case that can be settled. Otherwise, subject to closed session discussion, I'd prefer not to discuss it further.
Very good. I just I guess it was more of a probe to see if there was a different answer, because it was it's my general understanding that the people who are parties to the lawsuit are the ones who resolve it, and it doesn't succeed to some other third party for a public work. So that aside, Helen, I was curious to know if I had missed somewhere in the presentation where it didn't look like on the list for CIP that the General Jim Moore money was itemized. So maybe it's not on that list, but in a different place. But I wanted to ensure that was still part of the plan.
Transit project, the $10 million. The General Jim Moore has if you look at attachment D on the board report, page 24, it should.
Yeah, it's all in there, John.
The money's there, $1,056,000 and then $150,000.
Yeah, the detail is provided in the staff report that's on the website, so you can look at down to that level and see the project.
I see it on the staff report, and I just wanted to verify that I was reading it correctly. So
Okay.
I see it now, and thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So that's the intersection at South Boundary Road and General Gym. That's the money's approved for that.
Well, thank you, Chrissy. I'm specifically talking about the infiltrators and eucalyptus extension.
So the eucalyptus, Christy, do you want to answer to that?
That's under transportation contingency, and that's identified as the 1.130.
I see that just below the General Jim Moore improvements, and I just wanted to verify that both lists were the same, although they didn't list precisely one. One was more aggregated and not itemized, and the other is more itemized and less aggregated. I just want to make sure those married up. That's all.
Yep, you got it.
Thank you so much.
Any other board member with questions on the budget or the CIP situation? I'm not seeing any hands, but of course, as I know, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Does anybody else see any hands raised? Okay, thank you. Is there any member of the public who wants to ask a question or make a comment on the budget and the actions before us? I'm not seeing any hands. Anybody else see hands? Okay, thank you. Good, then I will bring it back to this body for a motion and or further discussion.
I would move approval of the mid-year budget adjustment with including the recommendations from the staff.
I'll second that.
Great, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion by board members? Seeing no hands being raised, we will move to a roll call vote.
Ian Oglesby.
Aye.
Supervisor Jane Parker.
Aye.
Supervisor Mary Adams.
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips.
Aye.
Councilmember Frank O'Connell.
Aye.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa.
Aye.
Councilmember John Wizard.
Aye.
Mayor Joe Gunter.
Aye.
Councilmember Janet Reimers.
Aye.
Councilmember John Gagliotti.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton.
Aye.
Mayor Marianne Carbone.
Aye.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Great, so we will revisit some of the remaining funds and how those might be allocated probably in May, possibly in June, when we know even better what the situation is. So thanks everyone for all your work on this. We'll move now to, actually I'm going to take things a little bit out of order. We're going to go now to item 8C, the building removal bond distribution methodology review. We'll have a presentation and then we'll move into some board discussion.
Okay, I'll set this up on my end, so just give me a second here. Get my screen share set up. So we have our bond folks on the call, but we might, the point of this presentation is to review the methodology that was used to get to the recommendations. Let's see, okay, so here we are. And then seek board direction. So let's see if I can get this. Okay, that changes the screen. Let me switch this out. Swap. Okay, there we go. So this is the background of how we got to the bond allocations that are currently in place. Of course, we began working on this bond project back in the fall of 2018. The administrative committee reviewed a set of options in September of 2019, and I'll go into the detail of those at the next slide. Then there was a series of actions. First, the County Board of Supervisors held a public hearing about the proceeds being used for public benefit in the county. And then this board approved bond documents at the December 13th meeting that included an allocation that was the recommendation from the admin committee. Subsequently, a number of things happened in March. There was a completion of a tri-party agreement between Seaside, Marina, and Monterey County Regional Fire District regarding compensation. The outcome of that is each of those cities will provide $2.4 million each over 20 years to the fire district. Then on March 5th, there was a letter presented from Monterey County asking for a reallocation based on staff and consultant review of the building removal need for the county. At a special meeting, the admin committee recommended adoption of that county request. And on March 12th, the Monterey County Superior Court approved the validation action. And on March, which was based on the December 13th approved documents. And then on March 20th, the city of Marina sent a letter to the board, which was shared with everyone, making a case for staying with the December 13th, 2019 allocation. So it's Director Garfield, I believe, that asked about the methodology that is the basis for this deeper dive into all of that. So this is a slide that was used by the admin committee back in September of 2019, summarizing 3 options that were considered. The first was based on the percentage of blight. There was a total accounting of all known blighted buildings and a percent allocated to the 3 main jurisdictions. There was a second option about percentage of tax increment generated, and that's shown here. And then the third option was based on an estimate of building removal cost. And so that was shown here. This is the one that was recommended and included in the bond indenture in the December 19th or 13th meeting. So these are the percentages here. And at a $40 million bond issue, this is how the revenues would look for use by the jurisdictions. This table here summarizes the request by the county, which included a $5 million minimum. So anything below $40 million, these percentages would adjust so that the county was kept at $5 million. And so that's kind of the history of how we got to where we are at the moment. And we have presented here 3 options for you all to consider. The first is maintaining the December 2019 allocations. The
Josh,
second- Yeah.
do you mind if I ask a clarifying question on your previous slide? That one,
Sure.
yeah.
Yes.
You're showing on scenario 2, Marina going down by $1.6 million, but it's actually going down by a lot more than that. So I'm not quite sure what.
Right. Okay. Good point.
As well, one shows a total of 40 million and the other shows a total of 30 million. But both-
That would be it. I've been dealing with a few different tables here. Let me see if I can correct this. Thank you for catching that. But give me a moment here, and I should be able to pull up a corrected number. Everything was going great, and then my math didn't work out.
And then Josh, while you're
Yep.
doing that, could you
Mhm.
also talk about, or is someone else going to talk about what we're thinking the proceeds might be at this point? Because I can see that you're working back and forth between 30 million and 40 million.
Yes,
And
yes.
so where
Right.
are we?
Maybe I'll have Mark address that, who's on the line, while I just pull up a corrected table for you. Mark, can you step in for that?
Yes, I am unmuting.
Thank you.
So here's the story. We actually, our best number we ever came up with was 50 million, okay? What that number was comprised of is 2 pieces, 40 million off of what I'll call vanilla normal bonds, and 10 million as a speculative bond issue, as explained to the board last year, that would be sold to investors who were willing to take a chance on whether or not additional real estate development took place in the FORA project areas, increasing the assessed valuation. The investor risk was mitigated by the fact that FORA will only be able to get at that 10 million to the extent there was additional assessed valuation growth. So that was all working until we had the COVID-19 bond market meltdown last month. And so what changed? The first thing that changed is that interest rates went way up. They're coming back right now. And so our $40 million vanilla bond got reduced a lot. At one point down to 25 million. Right now, I feel conservatively we can do 30 million. And my hope, taking the risk of embarrassing myself, is that if we were doing it today, we could get 35 million on the normal vanilla bond. And I am optimistic because the Fed announced a $2.3 trillion intervention in our nation's capital markets today, that we are going to get back to the 40 million we had based on interest rates on a normal vanilla bond issue for FORA. So what happens with the 10 million? I don't feel comfortable with that right now. And the reason why is that right at the moment, there are not investors who are willing to buy a bond that's speculating on future real estate development. There is big concern that what level of recession we're going into and what's going to happen to the real estate market. So the message to the board members is, this is just Mark speaking, 50 million is no longer a possible option. It would take in the next 2 months a major change in how people feel about the economy and the chances of a recession to put 50 million back on the table. I hope to God we get you back to 40 million, okay? And my worst case, I won't call it the worst case, but the conservative case is 30 million. So from the standpoint of any negotiation, dialogue about allocation of bond proceeds for remediation, the realistic range is 30 to 40 million. That's where you're working, that's where you're living with. I don't know if that's the same remediation allocation for 40 million that there is at 30, but that's the range I recommend. And again, my apologies. Right now, we did not have investors that we could sell a $10 million, we called it escrow term bond, that was speculating in future AV growth. So that's not on the table at the moment.
Thank you. I do have a corrected table. I did see that Cynthia Garfield raised her hand, and I also have other tables that we can talk about if you guys want to get into that. But I have corrected the one that of course, Professor Ochoa with the eye for the numbers got to us. But please, Cynthia.
Oh, thank you. I have a question for Mark. Is there any way that this bond issuance can include the possibility of a speculative bond later in 3 years or 4 years when things might be a better market for that, and hold it back until there are conditions that would allow those extra $10 million to be issued?
That's a great question. And you know what I want to do is say, right at the moment, I'm not aware of something like that being done, but we're living in a time right now where everyone has to be very creative, very innovative. And I'm going to put that question on the table with our finance team. If there's some way we could do a closet $10 million bond issue and just keep it in a closet until the market gets better. I think let me see what we can do. That's a great idea.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, let me see if I can get this one right for them. Hold on one second. I'll put this back up, but first I got to display my, okay, do this, and then do this, and then one second here, doing the thing. Okay. Boom, new table. Okay. So these numbers now should add up correctly, such that Marina goes down 1.6, Seaside down 1.6, and if you sum these two together, you get back to the original number. So how did I do, Professor Ochoa? Okay.
Looks good.
Sorry for the confusion there. And like I said, I've got a bunch of tables if you guys want to get into some more tables, but we tried to keep it focused here. The tables would look at, you know, a range of revenue from $30 to $40 million. That would be helpful.
So just, okay, one last question on this, Josh. So this table here, these two scenarios are scenarios for a different distribution, but they're all share the same scenario as far as what the bond market will look like.
Right. Yeah. $40 million is the projected proceed volume.
Right. Is there a proposal as to what would happen if it went down to 30? Would you prorate the reduction across the board?
Well, currently, the one that the board adopted in December has a set of percentages that is basically would flux with the yield, if you will. The request from the county includes a $5 million minimum, so that would maintain the county at 5 million, and the others would then change. And that's kind of what these larger tables I have show. So, but they're more kind of working, you know, they're not polished up, but I'd be happy to show them if you all want to see them. And I saw there's two hands raised. So who do we have? We've got Debbie, we got Gail Morton and Debbie Hale, right? And Alan Hoff is waving his hand. Okay. So Jane, do you want to do your thing?
I didn't have the screen up to see whose hand went up first. Did you see?
It was Gail, then Debbie, then Alan.
All right, let's do it that way. And I see Cynthia Garfield also has her hand up, so we'll have her go after Alan.
So it's just that the 40 million in this assumption on your slide here was the optimistic viewpoint, and I don't know that we should be looking at such a rosy picture and not consider if it's 30 million. Marina's 50%, as Dr. Ochoa is asking the question, is 15 million that we have, and we have cost of 60 million to get down our blight. And of course, it's less than 15 million if in fact we're at 46%. Also, the city of Marina had initially entered into a contract to take on $2.4 million of obligation to reimburse the fire district out of our general fund. We're anticipating, as is everybody else in this room, significant declines in our general fund that we're trying to scramble. We did that in the anticipation that there was going to be a $50 million bond, $35 to $50 million bond as set forth in Exhibit A to the past resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Morton. So I think what Josh is doing is putting up some information for us to see a $30 million scenario on the left on the table.
Yeah, so this is.
Thank you, Josh. That gives us a better, rather than just one assumption.
Yeah, so this is the range from 30 to 40 for the one that was approved in December, and I've got this one here, which would, show the county request with the 5 million minimum there, and not to interfere with the line of director speakers. So I think you had.
Director Hale next, and then Alan Hoffa, and then Cynthia Garfield.
Thank you. I just had a question if the TMC, MST, MCWD grouping was for simplicity's sake, or if we're all lumped into the same percentage. I did in the past we had
it was
separate.
for simplicity. It was for simplicity's sake. Yeah, and
okay.
I think the other relevant point there is that all three of those, while being individual entities, the impact of the building removal would be within the boundary of the city of Marina. So it has some benefit there. But.
Okay, thank you.
So what would help me, because in looking at the different scenarios, I mean, my criteria in judging this is what's going to have the most impact on our economy. And also to that end, what's going to have the most impact also on CSUMB and the land surrounding it. So what would help me, Josh, is if you could go through sort of for each of the entities, like some of them I know where they are, but some of them I don't.
Okay.
Where it is and what's going to go there when it's when the blight is gone. You just take us through that chart and explain that for each one of the entities.
In terms of the jurisdictions where the proposed expenditures would happen, if like where the building removal activity would happen.
So like, okay, Park, Arts District, Cypress, Knolls. I've got a pretty good idea where all of those are.
Right.
+2, I got a pretty good idea where that is. The ammo supply, I think that's out on Barlow Canyon. I know where that is. But then the rest of them, I don't, like from State Park, TAMC, the Water District, etc. I don't know where those are or what is going to go there.
Sure. Okay. Here I can. There is something that's in the packet. It's there may be some. Let's see. Can you see this map here?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay. So yeah. So this is the Marina City Park area here. This is the MST and TAMC stuff here. And this is the MCWD water treatment plant here. So all of those would be, front and center activities. Let's see. This is where the city of Seaside funds would go, primarily up here taking down these hammerheads, but there's a few little in holdings there. And then these other areas here. So as far as the cities of Marina and seaside, that's where the activities would be. And then the county activities are not shown on this map, but the ammo supply point is out, southeast of the East Garrison development. And there's a few buildings within that kind of general vicinity and footprint that would be the subject of the expenditure.
So basically, they're all pretty visible, and they're all mostly in that area around CSUMB, except for the ammo supply.
Right.
Which is
and the county, yeah, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. That's
Director Garfield, and then Dr. Ochoa.
Thank you. I just want to roll back and ask for some indulgence, please. Could somebody please explain to me, recall to me, why the county gets to say we get 5 million no matter what? And I don't know what the rationale is. I don't know what it achieves for our overall goals. And I'd like to sort of understand that better if someone could help me.
So if I might, I defer to the supervisors. Obviously, there is a letter that was provided, and the basis of that letter was the staff and the consultants of the county went into detail and looked at their actual building removal costs and came up with that number. And then also recognizing that their property tax revenues would be impacted by the issuance of the bonds. So with that, I defer to the supervisors here to follow up on that.
Do any of my colleagues want to speak to this?
Well, yeah, initially, FORA did an analysis on the blight in the county area, and it was tremendously underestimated, and it was like 2.5 million. And when we had our people go and look at the blight, we were relying on FORA. Looked at the blight, it was 12.5 million. When you look about the economic hit we were going to take, we were seriously thinking about filing an action up until the last minute when we looked at it. When we did our $5 million bottom line, that was when, although I got to say, that was when the market was at 40, 45 plus, but that was the rationale for us making, and before we made a commitment not to file anything in the court, we took it before the admin committee to get their commitment. So,
may I ask a clarification, Chair?
Yes.
So I would assume that the estimating that FORA did was consistent across all jurisdictions, so that if the county's revisitation of the cost to remove the blight was so far different than FORA's, how do we know that that's not the case for every jurisdiction, and that there will be the same case could be brought that they should get a certain, and I'm being a little argumentative about this, because it just seems like if the county's the only ones who brought in their own estimate and it came out way high, we don't know that the other estimates are any better. And so giving the county, or not just the county, but giving one of the participants a special dispensation under conditions that may exist for all of the entities concerns me a bit.
Thank you. And I think if I may say, and we have Dr. Ochoa to speak next and Director Morton, one of the things is that this request was made under sort of different financial conditions and scenarios. And so I think one of the things that my colleagues and I want to put forward today is that we would we're willing to look at a different way of thinking about this. We appreciate the admin committee stepping up and hearing the request, but I think it's safe to say, and I'll defer to my colleagues if you want to speak more to this, but that with the shift in the bond allocation scenarios, it seems prudent to take a different approach than what the county had put forward to the admin committee. So
it is a new world, isn't it?
yes, it is. So before I go to Dr. Ochoa or Director Morton, Director Phillips or Adams, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I do think it was a little different situation then, but in all due respect, when we got a $2.5 million price, and when the county went out and looked at all the property that we had that was blighted, that was completely ignored, it come up to 12.5 million. So I can't speak to the analysis they did, which is a lot of the property that they were doing the former analysis on was pretty glaring and easy to spot. So there was a big difference there. But having said that, I think Chair Parker speaks correctly that we've looked at this and say, can we make some reasonable alternatives as we go forward in this different market.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I would be waving my hand, but I can't.
Okay.
But I thought I would weigh in as well and just agree with what the chair has put forward, and my colleague Supervisor Phillips as well. I think we just need to look. There's a very different time now, and we need to look at the scenario in a different way. And I think that as we continue through the agenda, I think it's appropriate for us to just revisit what we came up with. And Cynthia, I don't know, it's really curious. Was everything undervalued? I have no idea, but that's a very interesting thought, and I appreciate your bringing it forward.
Thank you. Dr. Ochoa and then Director Morton.
Thank you. Well, I was going to actually make an argument along the lines of Cynthia's, but more abstract and more using economic theory. I was going to make the case that, assuming that the initial allocation was made to try to optimize the results, you would expect that the last dollar spent on each of these projects would yield the same benefit overall. So if that's the case, if at the margin the last dollar spent on each of these blight removal projects was equally useful, then if the total amount of money spent is reduced, you would expect that you would have a proportionate reduction in each of the allocations, so that there wouldn't, you wouldn't take the reduction falling on just some projects but not others. Having said that, at the beginning, the allocation to the county was so small that you might have had some problems with indivisibility of projects. If you're only allocating this much, it made some sense for that relatively small amount to just to keep it constant, regardless of what the ultimate bond issuance was when the bond issuance was at higher numbers. But now that but if you're now contemplating increasing the share of the county, it seems that then you're looking at that project becomes sort of on a par with all the other allocations, and it would make sense, absent some very specific finding of importance or priority, that you would reduce each one in a proportionate amount as the bond total was reduced.
Thank you. Director Morton.
Thank you. So by using the percentages, it's proportionately reduced, Dr. Ochoa. There's no set dollar amount. It's percentages of whatever the yield is. One of the key things that I just also want my colleagues at the county to respect is that between the city of Marina and the city of Seaside, we've committed to reimburse the county fire district $5 million, $2.5 million out of our budgets over the next 20 years. And I want to remind also that the date to object to the bond was the 9th of March, and City of Seaside and the City of Marina signed an agreement the Thursday prior to the closure for the fire district to object. And we did that at the urgence, primarily that Director Adams brought that to the FORA board and saying we need to make the fire district whole. And we relied on that. So when you're asking us to put $2.5 million of our general fund money into backfilling for the county, and then the county is also asking to reduce our bond yield of 4% by 4%, and 4% of a much lower expected yield, it's an unfair burden that City of Marina isn't going to be able to get its blight down, number one. And number two, we're going to already have significant problems in trying to come up with the $2.5 million to pay the fire district. Director Hoffa asked a really important question that never got answered. He asked where the parcels were and what's the potential development and the generation of future tax dollars. And the generation of future tax dollars are going to be the properties within the jurisdiction of Marina and Seaside, closer and along 2nd Avenue for us, which are going to have housing, commercial development, and contribute and mirror and match what the university's long-term plans are for the development of its campus and enhancement of the campus. I would ask the county on the parcels. I'm not sure that there's any planned development on the parcels that they are talking about that were not adequately represented in their numbers. Is what is the potential use of those properties, tax increment being increased? Marina argues that the county will benefit from allowing the jurisdictions of Seaside and Marina to get their blight down and allow us to go forward with the actual development, much of which is already entitled. So I put that out because that goes into Dr. Ochoa's economic model too. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other board members who want to raise questions or make comments at this point before I go out to the public, and then we'll come back to see if there's some direction we want to give? I'm not seeing any hands at the moment, so let's ask.
Frank O'Connell raised his hand there.
Oh, I'm sorry, Frank. Director O'Connell, please go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify my own mind. Is the proposal that's before us from the county a situation where a minimum of $5 million or 12%, whichever is more?
The way the request letter is written, it was the $5 million was the minimum. At the time the letter was written, $40 million was kind of the floor.
So if let's assume for a moment that the bond is a lot less than 40 million, and it shows up that the county is going to get 5 million. So then you would take the percentages and apply those to the balance after you subtract the 5 million?
That's how it's currently written, yes. So I have a, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Oglesby, I see your hand. Oh, and now I see Frank O'Connell's hand. Sorry about that. All right, Director Oglesby.
Thank you. I think Frank asked a good question. Director O'Connell asked a good question for me, and I'm not sure if Josh can clarify, because it's really what is the county's expectation of the floor of 5 million or a percentage? Because if we're going to vote today, we need to know what that number is, whether it's 40 million, 35 million, 28 million. And so if it's a percentage, that's one question. And then if it's the floor of 5, but if we're talking about a floor of 5, you know, Seaside can use that extra 1.6 like anyone else. But when you're talking about it, the county does have blight of 12 million. It's kind of hard to only offer them 2 million. So I appreciate the county not asking for 10. They came up with some type of internal decision about 5. And so to sit here and try to haggle, and then if it's not 5, then what do we go back to? The 2 million that we agreed to December 13th. So for me, I'm comfortable with moving forward after we, of course, after we hear public comment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, and I think we'll get into that, I think, after we hear from the public. So, yes. And are there any members of the public who have questions or comments on the bond allocation question?
Seeing Ron Cheshire.
Excellent. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Cheshire.
Yeah, Supervisor Parker and all, I'm speaking on behalf of the Monterey Santa Cruz Building Construction Trades Council. I think we've made it known in the past that we want to reach out to Congressman Panetta in regards to hopefully helping solve this. So what you're doing right now, we understand is an important step in trying to allocate the funds that will come forth. What we're hoping is that we can move on to an effort to where we can increase that and take care of all the blight at Fort Ord. I don't recall the original estimate of what it would take to clean everything up, but I know it's in excess of the $30 or so million. So again, I think some effort ought to be put forward in regards to approaching Congressman Panetta's office and starting the conversation as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public with a question or a comment? And I appreciate staff's help since I seem to miss hands even when I'm looking for them. So I'm not seeing any more hands.
Oh, I see one. There's Doug Yount.
Excellent. Okay, Mr. Yount, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, Chairwoman Parker. I'd just like to say that it's important that you also take a look as what Councilmember Morton said and Dr. Ochoa as well, which is the economic impact, the economic potential that comes from the blight removal and maximizing that investment. This is one of FORA's last investment opportunities and the largest one. And you want to make the most of those dollars. I also applaud Ron Cheshire's idea of going after federal stimulus dollars as well. And this contribution from FORA's TI bonds as a significant match towards anything the federal government or state might do. But if you really look at the impact of the projects that come underneath from which the building removal occurs and that goes forward, it really speaks to the projects and Seaside and Marina as being weighted a little higher, in my opinion, than projects that may not have the same either visual impact from removal of blight or the economic impact from the investment that comes. As you know, the Dunes project in Marina is moving forward with its building removal with different circumstances. We're doing our part, and as we speak, there's building removal going on. It would be a shame not to be able to continue that on the heels of when we complete in the next several months to keep this ball rolling, if you will, this next year, particularly for the job generation and the impact that it has to the area, even if for a short period of construction activity. So I would encourage maximizing the percentages to those areas that have the most significant potential for economic opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public before I bring it back to this board? Okay. No.
Saw John Phillips.
Right, he's not a member of the public, he's a member of the board, so I see him and I am going to call on him. Okay, so we'll bring it back to the board, and I see that Director Phillips has his hand up, and also Director Ramers after him.
Well, you know, you talked about it, Madam Chair, a little bit, or alluded to it, but when I can see how some of our colleagues are looking at the county as being maybe a bit overreaching. But when we looked at the $5 million minimum, we were looking about probably 6 million based on a percentage. So I would think it may be reasonable for the county to go down without any $5 million minimum, but with, say, 12.5% of the proceeds, which if we have 25 million, it brings us to 3.1 million, which is the bare minimum of the blight that's the most obvious that needs to be taken down. So if someone wants to make the motion on that, I would support it if my colleagues don't bite my head off. But I got to say, I think the county backing out of this position is tied in with the next matter that we're going to take up, and that's the habitat management, where I know we'll discuss that, but where the money that was supposed to be attributed for habitat management now has been reallocated, and frankly, the county took a hit from 13 million, where we thought we were supposed to get down to 6.7 million. And if that stays the way it is, I will then change my vote on this. So I'm sure this will go to a second vote. If not, I'll make sure it goes to a second vote, because I think what we do here is dependent on what we do there. And if we don't get a commitment of a reversal of the roles there, things will change here, frankly. And I would do everything I could if we take a hit like is recommended, that we take a hit of about 7 million on the habitat management. If we take a hit like that, I'll do everything I can, and hopefully my colleagues will, to even stop the bonding. So, but having said that, I'd be willing to support the county going down and going off the $5 million.
Thank you. Director Ramers, and then Director Oglesby.
I just want to say that I appreciate the county commissioners for taking a stand to reduce their percentage of the of this bond issue. I'm wondering if we might have another slide that might show us what the differences would be for everyone if they did take that lower percentage again. Would we be going back to the first percentage that they had, or what number? If we, is there anyone who can give us a clue? But I appreciate that they're willing to step down, and because I do support the concepts that have been stated before about the blight that is so visible, and the changes and the potential for development and revenue by improving those areas. And I think that's extremely important and part of the equation. So if we can see something, that's great. If we can't, we'll just have to.
Yeah, thank you. And I would just ask maybe, Josh, can you, I think it would be useful for people to see the percentages and, you know, the $30 million as well as the 40, because the $30 million is the conservative end of things, and the $40 million is the more hopeful and perhaps possible. But if you've got something that shows that.
Yeah. I can, what I have shows a range. The one that I showed you is the original allocation from the fall. And then the second one has that $5 million cap. So I can adjust that. If you guys want to keep talking, I'll work on something. And then
we'll keep people talking. I see you, Director Garfield. We have Director Oglesby first, and then Director Garfield.
And then you got Alan Hoffa too. He's waving his hand.
Why is it that I never see Alan Hoffa? Does he not raise his hand in Zoom? Is that the problem? And you can just see him on the screen?
Yeah, I think
Oh,
so.
that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Then
So,
you got Gail Morton after him. So you got
okay.
four
Well, I
people.
see her hand because she's in Zoom. So, okay, we'll go Director Oglesby, Director Garfield, Director Hoffa, and then Director Morton. And in the meantime, Josh will be getting us the
Yes.
information so we can see it on the screen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I just want to add my voice to appreciating what Judge Phillips said, and hopefully the other county members appreciate that too. We don't want to leave the county out there with too much blight and not enough money. But I agree with the other speakers when they said seaside blight, marinas blight does surround CSUMB. It is up front towards the highway in a sense like that, next to our campus town. And so if that percentage is something that works for everybody, then that 12.5, that makes sense to me. You know, I want to be clear about coming to the next agenda item. You know, I look to work out whatever we may decide there too, but I'll just keep, okay. Thank you, Chair.
Director Garfield?
Thank you. I think I'm looking at in the board packet, the page 117, about like that. It is page 3 of the NHA advisors, page 116 of 142, no, sorry, 115. It has side-by-side scenario 3 and scenario 4. Scenario 3 is the percentages at a $30,000 proceeds, and scenario 4 next to it is a $40,000 proceeds, same percentages. And if I could, if somehow we eke out $35 million, the 12.5% for the county then is about 4.38 million. Just to put some numbers on it. Do you all see that? Is that useful to look at those? Okay, that was my point, is I think we can see them side by side right there. Thank you.
Yes, that is in the packet. So that's great. Thank you for pointing that out. We have Director Hoffa and then Director Morton.
So I also just want to acknowledge Judge Phillips' comment. And, you know, in the Habitat Committee, I don't think we really saw the whole picture of, we were looking at just the habitat from the habitat point of view, just like now we're just looking at the building removal. But I think what the point that you are making is really there's a whole range of responsibilities the various entities are going to be assuming, and there are costs associated with all of them. And it's really the big picture. And unfortunately, just the way this process works out, we're kind of looking at each one in isolation. And I'm just thinking out loud, but I would almost, you know, and I can understand. So what are your real, we don't have enough money to meet all of the habitat needs. We don't have enough money to meet all of the building removal needs. That's just reality. So some of you and all of you are not going to get everything that you want. But the question is, what do you really need? And I almost feel like, and I think we still have time. I know we've only got 80 some days left, but I would almost recommend tabling this item and the next one and ask the admin committee to take another look. Because if the county really needs more money for their habitat, but they could do with less building removal, and to be quite frank, I think that makes sense. Like those buildings out there on Barlow Canyon, they are not as ripe for development. They're very expensive to remove. I don't think it makes as much sense as removing the buildings in Marina. But on the other hand, the county has a lot of land, a lot of habitat land to manage. And so I really wish that we could have a broader conversation where we're looking at both of these together so we can get each of you as much of what you actually need as possible. That's my thought.
Thank you. And so Director Morton is next, and then John Phillips, and then Mary Adams have their hands up.
So thank you, Director Hoffa, for that observation. And because we still have never had answered, what is being developed on the land out in the county areas that are advocating for the funds? And while the 12.5% at page 95 of the staff report, the 12.5% that the county is now asking for in this discussion, reducing it by 0.5% isn't going to make that big of a difference. But that's what reduces Seaside and Marina's allocation by 4%. That's no different than what's in the staff report at page 95. The staff report wasn't saying that 5 million was a bare minimum. It was reducing the percentages to the other entities, Seaside and Marina. My question to the county also would be that if in fact you were taking the 12% or 12.5%, would you take back your responsibility for your fire district obligation reimbursements, relieving the city of Seaside and the city of Marina from that reimbursement, since the bond proceeds now are being directed differently? That's one question. Second question, the development in the county areas where the blight, they're asking to be removed, what is that going to be in the sense of tax generation? And thirdly, the city of Marina, I'm speaking for myself in this particular instance, is that the blight removal is having significant amount of money for the blight removal is so necessary for us to benefit the entire region, the university, the county, our surrounding cities, that yes, we do, and Alan's comment about re-looking at, thinking about what's in the habitat distribution and what the responsibilities are. But we haven't heard anything that addresses that Marina has 60% of the blight in its location, and anything furthering us being able to remove that for the benefit of all. So thank you for this consideration, and I'm still looking to hear what's the county land going to be developed for and when.
Thank you. Director Phillips, then Director Adams, and then Director Oglesby.
Yeah, I'm not prepared to have my deposition taken by council, but I will say that obviously when we're getting maybe 3 or 3.2 million out of there, we're not going to take over the obligation that's already been assumed of the fire department. But having said that, I think obviously the county has a much bigger interest in making sure when we have close to 80% of the habitat, to make sure the funds that were put in there for the habitat is attributed so it can be done. And I think we could give up more on the bonding, but I think Mr. Hoffa's got a very good point. These things go together, and I'm not sure they've been worked out or thrashed out or discussed as much as they should have been. So I think it would make sense. It's hard for me to commit on one when I think the county is really going to take it in the shorts on the other one. And so I think further discussions in a less formal area than this might be fruitful. Thank you.
Director Adams, thank you.
So I guess I have a question really more for Josh than for anyone else. And that is, if in fact we do follow as Mr. Hoffa and John Phillips have suggested, and step backwards for a little bit and look at the two issues combined, do we really have enough time to do that and accomplish it, knowing that we're just up against the wire time-wise? Because my expectation is we'll have to go for at least a two-time vote. I mean, I would assume we would, we always do. So how would that play out? Or would we have to have a special meeting that would allow this kind of discussion to take place? I think, Alan, it just makes complete sense to me to follow the path that you're on. We have been looking at it in silos. It's so painful. I don't know why. Look at the entire of Fort Ord, the former Fort Ord, as a regional jewel. And if we don't start looking at it now, at the very end, finally, on what we can do to push forward the economy of our district, of our community, the best, we're just wasting our time, and we've already wasted plenty of money. But be that as it may, it's a question to Josh on whether or not we have the time to be able to table this for today, have a separate meeting where we discuss this at much more depth and with better staff focus on this side of it, and then still be able to accomplish what we need to accomplish.
Yeah, so the good news is there is time. We are working with the bond team, and I believe we might even have Paul Timmig on the line here, bond counsel, who is currently drafting a package of documents that we could bring in the first week of May, or at the first meeting in May, and I think that would be before that, so that it could be incorporated into the documents, or potentially, if need be, even at that meeting, you know, we would want to do this, what you're talking about, and so I think there's time to do that, Supervisor, and we on the staff side, we have been working on some analysis that would support this inquiry, and so we could deliver that to either a subcommittee of the board or the admin committee and have them consider it and come back to you all. I think that would be a reasonable thing we could get done.
Josh, let me just ask from a logistical standpoint, when is the next meeting of the admin committee?
Well, the next regular meeting is next week, and so there would be that, and I'm sure your admin folks wouldn't mind another special meeting, since we've canceled our habitat meetings. I think they're probably missing us, so.
I'm sure that's the case.
Yeah.
So, so I guess I see that Director Oglesby has his hand up, but I guess I'm wondering, because one of the challenges for us as county representatives is that our board has taken a position, and we can talk about some options probably, but we would it would be we would need to go back and consult with our colleagues about sort of our final position. So I think it would be helpful to look at both of these items together and really have it be a more global conversation. So I'm just putting that out there. And if it is, do you think it's something that is possible for the admin committee to discuss next week, or is their plate already full for their meeting?
I think we could get it on. We're sending out the packet tomorrow. So that's one way we could go. I have been able to come up with another set of data and chart that would be to the question that I think Cynthia was asking before I so I could show you that. And then another option is to table the conversation on this item now and bring it back after you take up the next item, if there's value in discussing them like that. I mean, I think
we could. I think it'll be helpful for the admin committee the more that this board can talk about the issues, then the admin committee has a feel for where their elected officials are. So, okay, well, we will consider that all options are on the table. It might be helpful to have the document up with the tables or the options that you mentioned, and we'll continue with comments. We have Director Oglesby next, then Kendall Flint, and then Director Morton.
Thanks, Chair. I don't know if I'm on board with tabling it right now, or definitely not. I don't know why we would send it to the admin committee to do what when the board is having a conversation now. I said before that I thought Director Phillips made a good comment about moving down to 12.5%, and that was his gambit, and I picked it up, and I said I think Seaside is willing to work with that on this as it relates to the other board item that we're going to move to next. We should talk about it globally, but to table it now to move it down to a smaller group And then, like you said, Chair, that I don't know what position that puts you in if the board, if your board already has a position. And so, so the comments from the Board of Supervisors are right before us right now. But again, Seaside is prepared to talk about how the county is made fuller, I won't say whole, but fuller as we look to the other agendized item. And so, like you said, I don't want to mix the two agendized items like some of you have, but I'm committing to, as this one moves forward, then we will support, what the county and what the whole board wants to do on habitat movement also, because that's just plain and fair. So to put it off and to reduce it down to a 5-member, 6-member admin discussion just to bring it back here, I'm not sure about that. Maybe like Josh said, we could table it and come back after the next agendized item. But I'm already prepared to support what the county is looking for on this agendized item now.
Great,
Thank you,
and
Chair.
of course, it's going to take 2 votes probably, so we'll be back next week anyway, so we can see how we go. All right, Kendall Flint and then Gail Morton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to suggest 2 things. One, I do agree with Mayor Oglesby. Frankly, just as a reminder, the way that the board has received this input is basically going through the process of the admin committee, and for the next item, going through the process of the Habitat Working Group. The makeup of those groups are specifically different. In other words, we've got a 1-for-1. And as the admin committee knows and the Habitat Working Group goes, in this item, we were 4-1 in one direction. In the next item, we were 4-1 in a different direction. So as much as I appreciate the idea of kicking it back to admin, I'm not sure that gets you any further down the line. Ultimately, this is going to be a board decision. So what I would strongly urge you to do is to table this item until we look at the next, and then take them up in order. I agree it's probably going to be a requirement for a second vote, but I think that there's information for both that once you hear it all together, it may mean that we move item 8D till the 17th. That's okay. These are those tough decisions that staff has been warning about for quite some time. And you're right, these are connected. They're not the same thing, but they do go directly to the impact of a lack of funding for implementation of a requirement or something that's to be good for a community. So if I may, I would suggest that you table this, let's look at the second, and then come back on both.
Thank you. Director Morton.
So I was going to speak to not send it back to the admin. I didn't think that was going to be beneficial. And the question that I had more was about, we've been having these Friday morning meetings and discussion as whether the board needed a working session that went through and looked at all of this simultaneously. And admin meeting being noticed also, how we did the working group plus admin meeting, both were noticed and both were there, but make it the full board.
Okay, that's an option. So I'm going to just take my prerogative as chair to say, let's table this now and move to agenda item 8B and talk about the Habitat Working Group recommendation and just see what we can get done here today on both of these issues. And if we need a workshop or if we need to do something differently, we have some options and not much time, but some time. So with that, let's, and Director Ramers, I see that your hand is raised, but I haven't been calling on you because I'm thinking that that was from your comment before. Am I correct, or would you like to speak again?
You are correct. Thank you.
Okay, super.
I'll go to the other side and take it down. Thank you.
I figure your arm's getting very tired by now. So, okay, great. Good discussion, and let's stay in the thick of the meat of the matter and talk about the recommendation from the Habitat Working Group.
Yeah, so this will be an item that that Kendall presents, and so I'll just let her get into that. I will mention that to all of this conversation, when we get back to it, I do have analytical products that should be helpful, and so you can look forward to those.
Okay, give me just a moment to share my screen as I go through these. Okay. So as most of you are aware, for the last several months, we've been actually meeting as the Habitat Working Group on Fridays. The Habitat Working Group, just as a reminder, this is a combination of FORA board members as well as a special meeting of the administrative committee. Over the course of these meetings, the real gist of it was to determine what the feasibility was of forming a joint powers authority if and when the members decided they wanted to move forward with the implementation of a habitat conservation plan, and also to explore what the financial issues were. Now, just so everyone is clear, at the last meeting that we had, the group did meet and I think went through quite a meaty discussion about potential allocations of the funds that have currently been collected from the Community Facilities District and set aside for habitat management. What would happen to those funds if there wasn't a JPA? And what we learned at the end of that meeting is there may or may not be a JPA in the months and years ahead, but it is unlikely that there's the political will for the agencies to move forward with that prior to FORA's sunset. So what we're looking at today is basically potential scenarios for the distribution of the funds that have been collected, and the Habitat Working Group has made a recommendation on that, but I do want to walk you through what they saw so you know why their recommendation was as it was. They were given 4 options. The first one you're looking at here is basically the idea that you take the amount of funds that have been collected to date that have not been distributed, and that is 16.6 million-ish. In this scenario, we were looking at a distribution of funds based on a multiplier that related directly to the habitat management areas that were under each jurisdiction. Now, what's very important to recognize about this in this particular one, this is only for the land use jurisdictions, not for the other agencies that may have property or may operate in those areas, but not be a city. The scenario 2 that was presented said, okay, let's take all the funds that we've collected and let's distribute them through all of the FORA stakeholder land agencies or people who manage land based on their allocations, based on their habitat management areas. Now, what you have to notice on this is University of California, Santa Cruz has a specific agreement that has been allowing them to receive funds from FORA in the amount of approximately $850 million, or sorry, $850,000. There's an additional payment that we made by the end of this year, but that is one of the reasons that you're seeing some of the net allocation being different from total allocation. And one of the things that the group struggled with was basically, okay, do we allocate these funds to everyone or only the land use jurisdictions? And what if these agencies have the ability to get other funds or generate funds? And there was definitely some spirited discussion on that, which brought us to option 3, which is, okay, we're going to take and only give funds for Monterey Peninsula College, University of California, and CSUMB. So this took out Monterey Peninsula Parks and it took out the state parks. This is just, again, based on the funds that have been collected at this point. The 4th option, which was requested by the Habitat Working Group, was let's look at the fees that were collected by agencies and how those collectively contributed to the overall amount. And when you see this, you'll see that basically Monterey County, Seaside, and Marina were the 3 contributors, not out of general funds, but out of the developer fees that were garnered by those agencies in order to support development in their communities. The city of Seaside developed a fifth option and presented that to the Habitat Working Group. And under the fifth option, it took the actual contribution numbers and then it proposed a percentage, it was 20%, that would say, okay, let's everyone reduce their overall take and give Delray Oaks a percentage and give Monterey a percentage. Now this is actually, I'm going to go back here, it gives them slightly less money that was in option 1, but it does still allocate based on, rather than the overall habitat management area, the amount of funds that were distributed. So the Habitat Working Group recommended that based on that, and we have about 16.6 million, that the allocation of funds goes as follows, which is basically 40% to Monterey County, 39% to the city of Marina, 16% to Seaside, and 4% to Delray Oaks, with 1% going to the city of Monterey. Now I want to take you back just for a moment to option 2, and I think this is important to recognize. Option 2 and option 1, let's go with option 1 first. Option 1, again, these are based on the habitat management areas. And I think this is important, and I believe we have Aaron Harway on the phone as well. The purpose of taking the funds in was to fund habitat management, habitat mitigation, whether it's for an HCP or in this case, from the federal standpoint, there are still obligations in place based on the deeds that have been recorded for habitat management. So this allocation was based on habitat management. And you'll see here when you look to the far right, the county, for example, gets 13 million and change. When you change that dynamic to our option, one option 4, option 5, you'll see the county gets substantially less money than that, based on the amount of money that was contributed by the developer fees that were garnered. So one of the challenges we have with this discussion, which is why I'm very happy we're having this now, is whether or not the this amount is going to be one appropriate. I think we all know, and I believe I heard Member Hoffa saying, there isn't enough money to get everything done we need to do, whether that's habitat management or it is the building removal. The question for the board is, the working group recommended this on a 4-1 vote, basically saying this is how we want to see it based on the fees collected by developers. But you all need to be aware that we've also been advised by the federal government through Leilani and a letter that we're going to be bringing to the board at our next meeting in general, that they are going to be looking for actual mitigation and, management of those habitat management areas. So something to consider in your deliberations is whether or not that is going to be, whether or not that is going to be a factor in your discussion about how you move forward with this. So if you move with the Seaside, which you can absolutely do, and again, that came through the process of the Habitat Working Group, which the board empowered to have these discussions, you just need to understand that is based on the revenue generated by the agencies as opposed to long-term habitat. So these are two different questions. And I think with that, we would be willing to obviously take questions, comments, and engage on the discussion.
Okay, thank you. So board members' questions. I see Director Oglesby has raised his hand, and staff, if Director Hoffa has raised his hand, you'll need to help me.
You ready, Chair?
Ready.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, we started this by saying we don't have a lot of time till 4 close, and since then we don't have a lot of time for this meeting today, so we need to just get straight to the issue. What is it that Director Phillips wants to do? What does the county want to do? What amount of money between that initial, I don't know, 6 million and the money that you need, which we don't have, what are you willing to do to get this done today? And then we go back to the next agenda item. So I really want Judge Phillips to tell us how he sees us working our way out of this because I think we're on the same page about getting this stuff done. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Director Phillips, you're on the hot seat. Do you want to speak?
Sure. I mean, the money was collected for a certain purpose, and the development was allowed only on condition that we took care of the habitat management. And the county ended up with 79% of the habitat to be managed. And, you know, to do it based on the development that was done is, to me, ludicrous, and it amounts to a misappropriation of funds. I don't think the funds can be distributed this way and have it pass muster with the federal government and everything else we have to do. But when you talk about us having 79% of the area that has to be managed, that none of the development would have been appropriate if we hadn't stepped up and started allocating this money for habitat management. And the county is now looked under the habitat management group, which consisted of Marina having a vote and obviously Seaside having a vote, where the county went from 13 million down to 6 million, a loss of $6,570,000 from what we're supposed to have. And Marina went from 1,000,003 up to a windfall of 6,544,000, and they have very little habitat to be managed, and Seaside the same way. So what I propose is we go back to alternative one, which is the only appropriate. Anything else is specious.
Thank you. I see Alan Hoffa's hand. So Director Hoffa, you're next, and then Cynthia Garfield after him.
Thank you. Yeah, so that I was kind of just going to ask staff if they could show us, because it's hard to go back and forth between this and the agenda and my computer, but if you could show us what does alternative one look like, and could you confirm that that in fact is sort of the most consistent with the percentage of lands to be managed, as Supervisor Phillips was saying. Thank you.
So thank you, Director Hoffa, and I apologize for jumping in there. I'm still getting the hang of the whole. Option one is based on the habitat management area. Options 1, 2, and 3 all are based on habitat management areas. At the option 3, which also gives money to the underlying jurisdictions, I think Member Hoffa, you mentioned this as well, that could also be accomplished through the underlying jurisdiction, through the cities or the county. UC Santa Cruz has received funds already. Option 1, which was the original one the ICF team came up with, basically looks at the amount of management area per jurisdiction. And I believe you and others had said that, okay, if folks are going to get some of these funds, that they need to work out something with the college and with the your jurisdiction to make that happen. So any one of these first 3 options are all based on habitat management areas. And I would defer to David or John at Kennedy Giffen to kind of weigh in on this, but it's something that certainly staff did have some concerns about, because while we understand where the working group was going in the context of the larger picture, it certainly should be considered that the funds were collected for habitat, and that's something you should consider in your deliberations.
Thank you. We'll move to Director Garfield unless Mr. Giffen or Mr. Willoughby want to chime in at this point. I'm not hearing them, so we'll go to Director Garfield.
A very simple question. Is the underlying assumption that all of these acres are roughly equivalent to one another, so that we've talked about, and the blight issue, some blight is harder to take down than other blight. Are all of these equal in terms of what it will take to manage them?
So to answer that question, Member Garfield, they are not equal. That's why you see different levels of the management. Some are borderlands, they have a different impact. We have different species in these different areas, and some jurisdictions have more than others. But this was, I'm going to say, the best guesstimate that the team from ICF and DDA put together to say this is what we think would be an equitable distribution based on the species that they have and what we know to be habitat that will be required for management. And I want to point out again, just so everyone recalls, these HMAs are a requirement on the federal side for taking the land. So that is going to continue pre or post FORA in perpetuity. This is something that each of the agencies will have to do going forward.
Okay, thank you. I think it's very artful to have that adjustment of starting with the acreage, and it does take that into consideration. I appreciate the explanation. I am not happy with the idea of, well, just give us our money back and we'll take care of it. These funds were collected for a regional collective purpose. And doing this collaboratively, collectively, for the greater good across not just those who are involved, but the entire region is really important. I mean, Pacific Grove, we're not paying any of this, but our citizens will be the beneficiaries of looking at this as a regional accomplishment. And so I would really much be in favor of something that does the greater good for the entire region. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members at this point? I'll go ahead and open it up to, oh yes, Mayor Carbone.
I think you need to unmute. Mayor, you need to unmute on your end.
Sorry.
There you go. There you go.
Sorry. So on page 27, you have the jurisdiction, the table with the jurisdictions with Monterey County, City of Marina, Seaside, et cetera, and on the land or the habitat set-aside funds, you have an amount, and it's by looking at the acreage of land, it looks like County of Monterey has about 1,600 acres. City of Marina has 236 acres. And City of Seaside, I don't know if that's 450 acres. Is that correct? And how does those allocations go that I guess City of Marina has probably, I don't know if it's 20%, and I may be wrong, but they have about the same amount equal to allocations as the County of Monterey.
So thank you for that question,
Thank you.
when you look at what's up here right now, in fact, I'm sorry, let me make that larger so you can see it a little bit better. Hold on here. So when you look at this particular slide, some of them are habitat management areas. These are different, it's a different designation. So Seaside, as an example, Seaside has borderland areas and others that are different, right? So that's why you see a different allocation for the number of acres and then the cost of managing those acres within that community. And so these were developed collaboratively with ICF and DDA, based again on the species and what is there. So some is basically, untapped open space that you've got to maintain, and others are those peripheral areas where they border between an existing development and things that might be considered habitat management. So that's why they vary, and you'll see like Monterey and Marina both have, again, the largest chunks of the management areas, whereas the other jurisdictions have different types. And that's why they've been allocated differently by percentages. I want to point out one of the things that Aaron, Gabby, and the folks that put this together pointed out. To be full disclosure, there isn't, a key somewhere that says this is the percentage you should use for this and this. This is their best guesstimate based on the costs of management and implementation on best practices that they reviewed in a very general sense, the 50,000 foot level, if you will. So is it an exact science? Probably not. Is it close to what would be an equitable? That was the intention that they had in developing these models.
Great. Any other questions from board members before I take it out to the public for comments or questions? I see Director Morton's hand raised, please. And then Mary.
So a great deal of discussion since January had gone through with regard to the allocation of the $16.6 million. And the last reiteration that ultimately was approved was proposed by the City of Seaside. But I do want to point out that on page 65 of our staff report, when you look at the structure with which the entire item was set up, looking at the acreage, the county was ending up with 46%. So when there was a new calculation that the county ended up at 40%, it was not that significant of a reduction from what the whole concept of a base-wide HCP was. But now going to the current discussion, I want to put forth to the county is it you're looking to get the money that for the bond money to be allocated 50-50, that you're making up the dollars here such that, for example, if the jurisdictions like Marina said, we would reduce our percentage to 25%. That frees up $2 million, and that went to the county, and the other jurisdictions deciding what they could give up. Is that what you're looking for?
I don't know if it's appropriate for me to speak, but I would say that my perspective is that for me, yes, the money looks like it goes back and forth, but the fact is that habitat money has to be used for habitat. And from my perspective, the habitat obligation is large in terms of the county's acreage and responsibility. It is in perpetuity. So this money, even if the county were to be allocated the 80%, which is consistent with the acreage and the species that need to be managed, it is still not enough money. So it's, and to me, the fact that it's not enough money for an infinitely long obligation is quite serious. Personally, I am willing on the bond to really think about the fact that those are one-time costs, and that for me, they don't have the same level of urgency because it's not a legal obligation that the county remove, all of those buildings right away, or, so, and my colleagues probably have nuances of that, but for the purposes of this discussion, I think the fair thing for the county's obligation is to have our responsibility and the allocation to us be reflective of the acreage and the responsibility. And there was one other point. And then I think also legally speaking, the money was collected to be used for habitat. So I don't think that it is proper from a strictly legal perspective for an allocation to be made based on contribution levels or something. It really needs to be based on what the responsibilities are and the need to provide the habitat management. So that's my answer as one of the county members, and I see that Mary Adams does have her hand up, so we'll see what she wants to say either on that question or.
May I ask a follow-up question first? Just follow up to
Sure.
that, if I can at this point. So I do understand that this is restricted funds and for use of habitat. One of the questions that was asked at the meeting of the working group was that if the county got a larger percentage of money and then lands were transferred to other jurisdictions, such as the landfill property, that portion coming, would portions of these funds come also, so that the management, when it's transferred, if management of acreage is transferred to a jurisdiction, that it comes with a portion of these funds?
That would be my understanding.
Okay, so that was one of my questions. And the second question that I have for consideration is, I do understand the county's argument stating that the bulk of the responsibility, looking at what you're indicating is the bulk of responsibility in this chart, 80% is the county. They want to be getting that portion of the money. And what the city of Marina is saying is, if that's a fair and equitable approach for habitat, that should be a fair and equitable approach also about the bond money. And we have 60% of the blight. That was one of the first descriptors that got put up there. When you looked at the percentage of blight, 60% of it was in the city of Marina. The alternatives that the admin committee went through and considered. So from a standpoint of me personally, I'm looking for a fair and consistent standard applied all the way across in all actions. Not just cherry picking, we're going to apply this standard in one action and a different standard in another, and then say this is in the regional best interest. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Adams and then Director Oglesby.
I think a lot of what I was thinking has actually just been said. I really do think that we have got to do this based on acreage, and perhaps it should be looked on both in both slides based on the amount of blight and the amount of acreage of the habitat management. I just think that the simple fact that this, you had said, Jane, that the blight is a one-time cost. We're going to be doing this in perpetuity, and it's really important. You know, it's really important for us to ensure that we fulfill this compact, if you will, with the federal government and with the community as well. I don't have any magic bullet here, but I do come from the same sort of school that Ian Oglesby does, Mayor Oglesby, and that I just want to see, let's just cut to the chase and see if we can't get it figured out. I think option one, in my mind, this looks just great for the habitat, and I would hope that we just quickly go back to the bond allocations and see if we couldn't come to closure on that as well.
Thank you. Director Oglesby and then Director Phillips.
Well, it's hard for me to follow Mary, but I thank you, Director Adams, for that, because I think that's what we should concentrate on. Now, far be it from me to say that the city of Seaside can't use any extra money that the county doesn't get, but Seaside doesn't want to be taking money that the county rightfully should have just so we can have extra money. That's not the role we're trying to play. So if we gravitate towards the option one, well then yes, that impacts Seaside negatively, but if that's fair for the region, then that's fair. But when we talk about the bond proceeds, then we need to maximize the money that goes to Marina and Seaside. And I won't speak for Marina, but maximize the money for Seaside so we can take down all of the buildings, 99% of the buildings, as much as the money will allow to take down. And then that would be fair, and I think Seaside would support that. So that makes a lot of sense to me, particularly if the county doesn't need any of that bond proceeds because, you know, those buildings can be done in the future, then that makes sense. So I thank the chair.
Thank you. Director Phillips and then Director Hoffa.
Yeah, I'm prepared to move forward and make a motion that we go with option one. And if we had to even come down more on, because as you said, Supervisor, these funds have to be used for habitat. And as you mentioned, it's a long range obligation and there's not enough money in there even at this amount to take care of the long range obligation. And I agree, even if the county had to come down to maybe 12% instead of 12.5% on the bonding, because I do agree, the more visual blight is in the areas of Seaside and Marina, and not as much. And I think there was an agreement with the county that we would take over the habitat obligation for MPC in the course of that. So anyway, at the appropriate time, I'm ready to make a motion.
Thank you. Let's, I'll hold you to that, but let's not make a motion yet because we haven't heard from the public. And anyway, so thank you. Mr. Huff.
So I was actually going to make a motion along those same lines as Judge Phillips, and it seems like we're sort of coming to a consensus here, but I'll also hold off, or I'd be happy to second his motion when he does make it.
And if I might jump in at some point, I have a slide that'll illuminate what you're talking about. If you want to look.
Thank you. Let's see your slide, Mr. Metz.
Okay, give me a second here. Okay. Yeah, so can everyone see this table? So these two here are what were recommended, the change. So this is the fund, the CFD funds and the habitat. This is alternative 5, and this is alternative 1. And this is the bond proceeds. This is the allocation from December. This is the county's request. Now this is $30 million or $40 million. I could, I believe, change this to 30, and these numbers could adjust. So if that's helpful, it shows, you know, this is the difference between the proposals on either case. This is alternative 1, the needs-based habitat option, and this is the December 2019 allocation, which is based on the needs identified and support recommended by the administrative committee. Keep in mind that these properties here are in the city of Marina. So the total is 63.3% of the funds, which is for use in the city of Marina.
Okay, I think that is helpful. I do want to see if there are any members of the public who want to comment on this habitat discussion. And of course, we are sort of tying in the bond as well. So is there any member of the public who would like to use the raise hand feature on Zoom to make a comment or ask a question at this point? Okay. Yes, okay, I'm seeing some hands. Excellent. Sherry Damon, then Vicky, who could be, I'm not sure Vicky's last name, and then Melanie Beretti.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. You know, in looking at the various options, I would make a couple of observations and comments, and I think Ms. Flint raised this issue, that the consultants put forward what I call a WAG. And multiple times during the Habitat Working Group, there were lots of questions and requests for additional information on other pieces of analytical. For example, one of the pieces of information that FORA has and presented was over the past 10 years, there are actual costs related to the management of a habitat management area that contains all the species across the board. That information was not used in the analysis at all. And that's the UC reserve. So if you look at that, the actual cost to manage a per acre of a habitat management area is about $167 per acre. And what is shown in alternative one is substantially higher than that amount of analysis. So I think there's an analytical gap there. And then in addition, the borderlands management, I don't think was given the appropriate amount of emphasis in the overall analysis. Borderland management is important for a lot of different reasons, and it's not just habitat management, it's also fire protection, fuel modification, and there's an ongoing perpetual obligation to manage those areas, and the county, Seaside, and Delray Oaks have a good chunk of that. And if you just looked at that as fireland, wildland management, in addition to habitat management, the percentages would be radically different than the ones in alternative one. So they would come up to be about 64%, 21%, and 10% of the overall habitat obligations, which would result in the county, if you just looked at that, getting about 10 million, a little over $10 million for their chunk of the money. But the emphasis, I don't think, was there, nor was the analytical brain power there in terms of the pulling all the pieces of information and responding to the request for additional information. So would be looking for something a little different than alternative one.
Thank you. Vicki next, and then Melanie Beretti.
Oh, we received an email from Vicki. I believe it is the same Vicki.
Vicki Nakamura, yes.
Thank you.
There you are.
Should I read my comment?
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. For board members, I have been involved with corridor development issues on behalf of MPC since 1992. I was there when the agreement with FORA and the county regarding the East Garrison land swap was negotiated. The conflict between MPC and the county over two very different visions for the East Garrison was difficult, and reaching an agreement took several years. But in 2002, an agreement was reached. MPC gave up the East Garrison for land in the Parker Flats area for its future public safety training facility. Included was a 200-acre habitat reserve that surrounded a potential site for a firing range. MPC did not want to manage habitat. This was not something we do or which we are funded for. But the habitat reserve was part of a regional approach to mitigating development across the base, forming the basis for both the habitat management and habitat conservation plan. MPC has been a partner with the other jurisdictions in this planning effort, which has finally come to fruition in FORA's final year. With FORA's imminent dissolution, however, commitment to this approach has also seemed to evaporate. The habitat funding allocation decision before the FORA board has been characterized at the Habitat Working Group meetings as the worst case scenario in the event a replacement JPA is not formed before FORA sunsets. However, discussions regarding a JPA have ended for now. It seems likely this worst case scenario will go into effect. And if you approve of alternative 5 with the premise that all land use jurisdictions should get a share, then the purpose of the funds, which was to manage habitat land set aside to mitigate base-wide development, will have been negated. Alternative 5 does not acknowledge Monterey County's extensive habitat lands. Alternative 5 leaves out MPC and the other educational institutions. Alternative 5 does not recognize mutual benefit of these habitat lands to all jurisdictions and their development interests over the long term. Thank you.
Thank you. Melanie Beretti, I'm not seeing your hand anymore, but it's your turn to speak if you want to. Okay, I think we may have, we lost Melanie Beretti. It looks as though we have. Any other member of the public wanting to make a comment or ask a question at this point? If you'd raise your hand in the Zoom function. And if Melanie Beretti reappears, then we will let her speak. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised, so I'll bring it back to this board for further discussion and perhaps action. I see Director Ochoa has raised his hand, Director Ramers, and Director Morton. So,
thank you. Well, I have to say I find the previous speaker's comments compelling. We're looking at an option that would be based on acreage, and yet the acreage that's going to be that falls to the to MPC and to CSUMB will be left out of that formula, even though the UC has gotten a significant allocation in the past for that purpose. So I guess I would want to second support the thrust of the previous speaker's comments.
thank you. Director Ramers and then Director Morton, and following her, Director Hoffa.
I'm responding to Sherry Damon's statements about the amount of maintenance and for the land, and that it isn't all equal. And I don't know if it's any opportunity now to in any way weigh the various allocations according to the amount of management each specific parcel takes. It sounds very complicated, but it seems to me that they're not all equal by her statements. So I throw that out as a question, and whether it can be addressed or not, I'm just going to ask that question.
Does staff want to respond? Kendall Flint or Josh Metz?
Yeah, I think I'll ask our HCP consultant, Erin Harwain, is on the line here, that she can weigh in on this. But the short, message from my seat is that, there is in existence a rather detailed and complex cost model that is based on the UC actual expenses for maintenance, the state parks actual expenses for habitat management, as well as the BLM. That information was analyzed by our team, and as they built this model here that we've been looking at, the ones that are included in the packet, I think probably the best page to look at is page 68, which is attached, which summarizes the different alternatives that the ICF and DDA team came up with. Their analysis basically showed that using acreage as a proxy for cost was a reasonable assumption to make. So while I think Sherry's comments are intended to illustrate that it wasn't perhaps based on a explicit from the nuts and bolts of each management action, all scaling all the way up to the actual cost for implementation on a given site, that they're actually a pretty sound basis for generating these alternatives. So I would ask Erin Harwain to add any color that you might those comments.
I think I'm unmuted. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Oh, great. I think Sherry's comments were good, and as Josh mentioned, UC's costs for various activities were included and considered in the cost model. And maybe Aaron, I know Aaron Gabby's on the phone too, and he wants to pipe in. But I would also point out that while Sherry mentioned the cost per acre, this is a one-time payment, but this management needs to be done in perpetuity. So I'm not sure how much per acre this covers. I'm not, I was trying to do the math, but I'm not sure how many years this would last, this allocation per jurisdiction would last at 167 an acre, for example.
Is Aaron Gabby on the line? I think you're on the line, Aaron. Aaron Gabby, paging Aaron Gabby.
He was here. Perhaps he's...
Well.
All right. Well, if he reappears, we'll let him speak. We'll move then to Director Morton and then Director Hoffa.
Thank you. So if, Josh, you could put back up your last slide where you had the two scenarios, left and right.
Yeah, okay, give me a moment here.
Okay. And Chair, if you want to go to someone else while he gets that up, that's fine.
There you go.
There. So I just want to be sure that I'm understanding the discussion that is now going forward. If the county is taking 12% of the bond issuance, that is in this column of we're applying one standard with regard to the habitat and a different standard with regard to the blight, not based on where the concentration of the blight is and the allocation of the funds to what is the responsibility. The question was if people were looking at this and saying we're going to apply funds to follow the responsibilities, that then you would do what's in this column, alternative 1 for the habitat, with the bond proceeds being the 50% to the city of Marina. This column this way is applying the same criteria and standard for that regional benefit. What I heard from two speakers was, well, the county still wants 12.5%, which is where we started an hour and a half ago, was that reduces the bond by 4% to Seaside and by 4% to Marina, but we have the greater responsibility. So the question is, are we all going to consider the overall standard that we've articulated as our regional responsibilities with regard to habitat and the bond consistently? Thank you.
Thank you. We have Director Hoffa and then Aaron Harwain and then John Phillips and then Mayor Oglesby.
Okay, so really my question to our county supervisors here is, if we move forward with alternative 1, are you committing to working with the educational institutions who really have the expertise to manage lands? Is that a commitment that you're going to work with them? Because that would be important to me that you do. And then just an observation, I guess, I'm not sure, these assume are going to be 2 different votes, but when we get to the bond proceeds, I agree with Director Morton that if we're looking at it based on the percentage of habitat, we should be looking at it based on the percentage of blight in the other case. And it sounds like that's about 60% for Marina. Now, Josh was pointing out, I guess, that some of the non-jurisdictional blight is in Marina. It's just, I guess, not the responsibility of Marina. So I don't know how that plays out, but one way or another, I think that, if we're going to look at it on a percentage basis here, it should be looked at on a percentage basis there.
Thank you. Aaron Harwain.
Thanks. I forgot to add, and Aaron, it looks like Aaron Gabby's back. Aaron, I think you might have been disconnected, but there was a question about how UC's cost model was utilized to inform the HMP cost model. But I wanted to also point out that I think there was a question about the level of effort and activities being applied in related to Sherry's comment about fuel break maintenance and the cost and those different activities and requirements in each of the HMAs, reserve areas, and then borderlands and interim management. You can see those different columns in the, not on the screen, but in the tables in the green and the yellow and the pink. That level of effort and cost of each activities by area category were considered. So that work has been done.
Thank you. Director Phillips, then Director Oglesby, then Director Garfield.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
It takes a while to teach us old guys how to use this modern equipment. Now, I see it a little differently. I see this as a mandate of what that money was collected for and what it has to be used for. But having said that, I agree with you, Supervisor, that this is a long-range commitment. The bonding is less important to us since it's a short-range commitment that doesn't really benefit the county very much and costs us some. But to answer another question, yes, I think the county is committed to working with the educational institutions. But if this alternative passes, I would recommend to my colleagues that we even drop down less to 11%. It's a bare minimum for the county, but considering that we may be up, and it's recommended we'll be up to 30 million on the bond, I think we could live with 11%. So everybody is giving some on the total issues.
Director Oglesby?
Thank you. I appreciate Director Phillips saying that, and I just want to make sure that means we'll evenly divide it between Marina and Seaside, because Seaside is still close to about $4 million short of total takedown of our blight. So that 8 million may seem like a lot, but as we calculated, we need a minimum of 12 to even $13 million. So I look forward for that 1.5% to be evenly distributed. So those are my comments. I appreciate Director Morton bringing up the concept of, being consistent all the way throughout these two agreements in this document. So if we could just change those, thank you, Josh. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Director Garfield.
My head is still spinning a little bit, and I really appreciate all these quick changes to look at on the screen. So I'm hearing us coalescing around the alternative one, which goes with acreage, but complexity is figured into there. So it's how hard it is to do and how much you have to do seems to be well reflected in alternative one about habitat. And I'm trying to figure out how we can get to apples and apples on the bond proceeds. And I think that the county actually, by coming up with their own estimates, in fact did that and showed that their obligations will be more expensive than the original estimate. The estimating wasn't done with as many adjustments for complexity on bond as there were on the habitat for the long range plan. So I see the 11%, and we've gotten the county very, very productively looking at weighing this out in two different regards. And I hear Seaside as well, but I haven't heard from Marina what they think is a good idea. So I'm looking to see what Marina is thinking is a good idea, starting on scenario 3 that was just put up there. And nobody's going to get everything they want. So I'm asking to hear a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Dr. Ochoa's hand and then Director Morton.
Thank you. I'm not sure if we're focusing now. Do we have a motion on the table? Or are we talking specifically now about the bond, or are we talking about both?
We appear to be in a sort of horse trading mode. No motion on the table. We're just discussing what possible options are and how we might think about this.
So then I would say that on one level, I'm comfortable with the fact that we have somewhat different methodologies for both of these, but they both seem to be adequate to the issue at hand on each one of the two. However, I still have a problem. I would like to have someone explain to me why, if it makes sense to do it on the basis of acreage of habitat, why the colleges were left out. Given that we are, in fact, given that analysis that was multifaceted and that showed the extent of the differential responsibility for that acreage, the staff did come up with some pretty nuanced numbers. Yeah, right there. So why go with alternative 1 rather than
alternative 3 would explicitly include the colleges.
Right. So in order, if I understand that alternative 1 is being advanced, I mean, how would alternative 1 handle this? Would it be that, I guess one possibility would be that, even though there's acreage within our footprint, we ourselves are situated partly in Seaside, partly in Marina, partly in the county. So does that mean that our acreage would be carved up and become the responsibility of the land jurisdiction entities? Is that the way that the alternative 1 is structured?
If I may respond to this just a little bit, we discussed it briefly at the Habitat Working Group, and there are a couple of things here. One is that I proposed that the County of Monterey work out an agreement with Monterey Peninsula College because of the swap and the arrangement that Vicky Nakamura mentioned, that and combined with the fact that Monterey Peninsula College has very little or no development potential in their area to help offset any costs, whereas the University of California does have quite a bit of development potential, and so not only has received some money for habitat, but will be doing further, having further revenue come to them that can be applied to their habitat needs. The CSUMB portion is quite small, and I think the question might be for all 3 of the jurisdictions, the landholding jurisdictions that are being proposed under alternative 1, is whether we would be open to working with CSUMB on your acreage. Also, for such a small area, and CSU is a large system, so the degree of concern about it was relatively small. But I think at least for myself as one county supervisor, so I don't speak for the rest of the board or even my colleagues, I would be willing. I do think that the county needs to keep our commitment to Monterey Peninsula College, and I'm open to negotiating something with CSUMB if needed, and if the others are open to it.
Thank you.
Jane, you're muted, just so that you know that. I don't know if you muted your.
I'm not speaking now. Gail Morton should be speaking.
Okay, great.
Thank
So
you.
going back to Director Garfield's question, and again, Josh, the slide that has the scenarios. Under this bond proceeds that was the December 13, 2019, at $30 million, the city of Marina is getting $15 million. What's not reflected in this slide, that our cost estimates to remove the blight that we've discussed is $50 million. So we are bearing a great deal of the cost, but everybody that's voting on this needs to understand also is we have no sources of funds to be able to generate to use for blight removal. It doesn't exist in the city of Marina. So we really, to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish for the development of this region, the maximum amount of the bond to the city of Marina makes the most sense. And again, that's why I'm arguing if you're looking at that regional approach for the bond habitat, for the habitat money, why wouldn't you be using that regional approach that Marina at $55 million to get our blight down? 15 million is only a portion. And when you take away reducing the 11% that we're giving up 4-point-some%, it's extremely detrimental to Marina, but it's more detrimental to the region.
Thank you.
Thank
Director
you.
Wizard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just, to echo something that we just heard, I would say that the city of Seaside does not have revenues to take down its buildings that need to come down. And to the extent practical, the more amount of bonding we can acquire, the more we can do to position ourselves for success in the future. And to that end, the city of Seaside has not developed the Dunes project or the Sea Haven project and does not have any collateral benefits from East Campus Housing and East Garrison. And so we also look to maximizing the amount that we get from the bond. And to that regard, I think it's important to go back to what I think Mr. Metz said, and I think Mr. Hoffa alluded to, if he didn't just say it outright, is that a majority of the transportation and water projects are not in the city of Seaside. And so it's almost as though those are being double counted. And so if we're going to talk about financial burden and the region, well, there's more in the region than just any one city. And so, I would like to see more discussion on that topic.
Any other board members with comments or questions? I guess one thing I would say from my perspective is, and my colleagues may or may not agree with me, my county colleagues, but I think if we as the county are pushing hard for alternative one on habitat, we need to be more willing to get closer to scenario one on the bond proceeds. And there are two reasons for that. One is the amount of blight that we have that is visually damaging to the region is quite small. It's tucked away. The other thing is that the cities of Marina and Seaside stepped up with a significant contribution to the county's fire district, and they are on the hook for that, regardless of the level of proceeds. So I just feel as though we would be more in line with the regional and teamwork approach if we were willing to just go strictly by the scenario one that was originally adopted in December, or significantly. I mean, I'm comfortable with that, but I think if we're going to get where we want to go on habitat, we need to bring our percentage down significantly to closer to 6%, or, you know, as I say, I'm comfortable with the 4.5%, you know, in the scheme of things here, but I don't know where my colleagues are in that, and I see that Director Phillips has something to say, as does Director Oglesby. Thank you.
Well, I think it's time we vote on the habitat, and we'll take up the other one. I think you and I and Mary are willing to be reasonable, and we're trying to do that, and we'll meet them halfway. But I think it's time to vote on the habitat issue, and then we'll go to the next one.
Director Oglesby, and then Director Garfield.
I appreciate what Director Phillips had said, and Director Wizard, and you too, Chair, about how the county should just dig a little deeper, because those buildings that you're talking about taking down, you guys can take down when you need to over the next several years. But we're trying to take down those buildings in our jurisdictions, Marina and Seaside, over the next 2 to 3 years. And any of that development will, you know, lead towards tax revenues for the county. Any of those buildings that remain up will take away from CSUMB and what we're both trying to do in our communities. So, you know, the bottom line is any extra dollars that the county can give go straight to blight. And ergo, it will increase economic development within the county. So I would ask the county to take a look at that. And I heard Judge Phillips say that they're willing to do that after this vote. But I just wanted to throw that out there. So thank you.
Director Garfield.
Thank you, Chair. I had a comment actually on redoing and working a little bit with scenario 3, but I would hold off on that. And if somebody wants to make a motion about going ahead with habitat vote, then go back to the second phase of this, and then I'll comment on the scenario 3.
Well, okay. So are people ready to vote on habitat?
Yes.
Okay, I see some agreement. So I will then entertain a motion that on the habitat. Go ahead.
I so move scenario 1 on the habitat.
I'll second that, and this is Director Hoffa.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second to go with alternative 1 on the habitat. Any further discussion? I do see some hands raised, but I think they may be previously raised rather than currently raised. I see.
No, mine is raised.
Right, you're a new one on my list, and I saw Mayor Oglesby waving. So Director Morton and then Director Oglesby.
So the difficulty is that initially we were looking at the bonds to start with. We went to the habitat. We asked that these two things be considered simultaneously. We still haven't reached agreement about the reduction in what the county is asking for in the bond issuance. But now we're cutting off that discussion and wanting to vote on habitat. It makes it very difficult from a jurisdiction such as marinas that we're looking to support the county with regard to the habitat, but we're not having any indication there's going to be support for the city of Seaside and Marina with regard to scenario 1, which was the action taken in December of 2019. It makes it a difficult position to vote. I want to point that out. Thank you.
Director Oglesby?
That's a good point. I want to agree with Director Morton about scenario 1. Right now, scenario 1 is still the suggested motion. 3 is what we were discussing, but hopefully we can get closer towards scenario 1. But I raised my hand quickly, Chair, to say Seaside supported the option 5 because at the habitat management, there was nothing moving forward. So we came up with a suggestion, and that was from the city manager, and I want to appreciate him for that. It wasn't as though the Seaside was trying to adversely impact any entity to include the county. So I just want to make sure that's on the record. We were not trying to do that.
Okay, I still see Director Garfield's hand up. Did you want to speak now?
Sorry. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
And Director Phillips?
No.
Okay.
Call for the question.
Okay, and I see Director Hoffa's hand up.
Yeah.
Did you want to speak before we vote?
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to acknowledge what Director Morton said. And I just encourage her to support the motion despite that. I understand her position, but I hope that she's heard enough of us indicate that we want to make sure that Marina and Seaside are taken care of when it comes to blight. And we don't just Brown Act, we have to vote one at a time, but I believe we're going to make sure we get the right thing done. So I hope you'll consider that.
Okay, there has been a call for the question, and if people are ready, I will just not ask us to vote on that question, but we'll just go directly to the motion that's on the table, which is that we go with alternative 1 on the habitat distribution. If we could have a roll call vote, please.
Can
everyone hear me?
Aye.
Okay.
Supervisor Jane Parker.
Aye.
Supervisor Mary Adams.
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips.
Aye.
Councilmember Frank O'Connell.
No.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa.
Yes.
Councilmember John Wizard.
Aye.
Mayor Joe Gunter.
Aye.
Councilmember Janet Reimers.
Aye.
Councilmember John Gagliotti.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton.
In the understanding of my colleague, Mr. Hoffa, I will vote aye.
Mayor Marianne Carbone.
Aye.
Things that
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Motion passes, not quite unanimous, so that will come back for a second vote. And we can move now to the question of the bond proceeds. And we've had quite a good discussion. So if people are ready, I would entertain a motion. I see Director Morton has her hand up, and then Director Adams.
So I would make a motion that we proceed with the allocation of the bond proceeds as set forth in scenario 1 and adopted December 13, 2019.
I'll second that motion.
I'll second. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. We
Go
have a
ahead, Al.
motion and a second. Mary Adams, did you want to speak? Are you on mute?
I don't think I'm on mute. Can you hear me?
There we go. That's better.
Good. All right. So I was simply, before there was a motion in a second, I was going back to scenario 3 and trying to see if we could come to some agreement there by taking the county's percentage down 2 points and splitting the other 1% between Marina and Seaside.
So we have a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Could we have a roll call vote, please? Oh, sorry. I saw Director Garfield's hand after I asked for the roll call vote. Are you okay?
Actually, I would like to follow up on Supervisor Adams' point is that in my original comment that I deferred until the vote, I was going to ask for some additional work on scenario 3 to look at various alternatives. Let's see where this vote goes.
Actually, I would like to make a substitute motion.
Ah.
And I would like to make a substitute motion to support scenario 3 with the county's percentage going to 9% and the additional percentage points, 1 to Marina and 1 percentage to the city of Seaside.
Okay, there is a substitute motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to go with a revised scenario 3. And is there any discussion on this motion? I see Mayor Oglesby. Oh, wait, I see Director Phillips has his hand up and Director Oglesby after him.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable alternative, and I'll support the motion.
Director Oglesby?
I don't think that's reasonable. I thought we just said we were going to be fair all the way around, and now we're down to just chopping off 2 percentage points. That's not reasonable. So I'm sure this will have to come back again, but just going straight to scenario 3 and dropping off 2 percentage point, well, there's a lot of room. So that seems to be a non-starter.
Okay, Director Hoffa.
Yeah, I agree with Director Oglesby. I don't think it's conceptually consistent with our prior action, which was looking at percentage of habitat. We should be looking at percentage of blight. And I don't think it makes sense from an economic standpoint either. So I'm not going to be supporting the motion.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other hands going up. Let's go ahead and take a roll call vote. This is on the motion to go with scenario 3, revised scenario 3 for the bond proceeds. Take it away, Mr. Tregenza.
Mayor Ian Oglesby,
No.
Supervisor Jane Parker,
No.
Supervisor Mary Adams,
Yes.
Supervisor John Phillips,
Aye.
Councilmember Frank O'Connell,
No.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa,
No.
Councilmember John Wizard,
No.
Mayor Joe Gunter,
Yes.
Councilmember Janet Reimers,
No.
Councilmember John Gagliotti,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton,
Harry, Gail texted me and said she's lost voice capability, so I'm not quite sure what we do about that, but anyway.
She can signal, no, no.
Gail, can you hear us?
Wait, what's Giffen saying? Go ahead, Giffen.
Have her text you the vote, or her vote.
Okay.
I could vote for her.
Okay.
You can also use the chat function down below and send a vote to him.
True. She's working on it. She's working on it.
Here we go.
Josh, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Kendall. She can't text the vote.
Oh.
No, sorry, she can't.
No texting? Okay,
no,
never mind.
Because of the new Brown Act,
right.
she can call in. That would be a big no-no. You can pass her if there are enough votes to either pass or not pass the motion. It goes from there, but you cannot have her text.
Okay.
Can she write it on a piece of paper and hold it up?
No. Are you being silly now? It's because
You can call in. Telephone.
Telephone. Is there a phone number?
She can phone in as long as we audibly hear her, but she has to audibly give her vote.
Okay. All right. So we were partway through here. So let's continue.
Okay, and come back to her.
If you can.
It's not going to make a difference.
Okay.
No.
Mayor Marianne Carbone,
No.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield,
Yes.
4 ayes and is that 8 noes?
Okay, so that motion fails. So the motion we have on the table is to go with scenario 1 as to the bond proceeds. And I see, so I have a couple hands up here. Director Hoffa, is your hand up newly or, okay. Director O'Connell, did you have a comment?
No, no, I
Okay.
did not.
All right, thank you. Then let's proceed to a roll call vote on the motion to go with scenario 1 for the bond proceeds.
Mayor Ian Oglesby,
Aye.
Supervisor Jane Parker,
Aye.
Supervisor Mary Adams,
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips,
No.
Councilmember Frank O'Connell,
Aye.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa,
Aye.
Councilmember John Wizard,
Aye.
Mayor Joe Gunter,
No.
Councilmember Janet Reimers,
Oh, aye.
Councilmember John Gagliotti,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton, I don't know if she can hear us.
She can hear, but she can't speak.
Continue the vote.
Mayor Marianne Carbone.
Aye.
Sorry, was that aye?
Yes.
And Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
No.
Motion passes.
Point of order through the chair.
Yes, Mayor Oglesby, I'll just say the motion passes, but it's not unanimous, so it will come back for a second vote. Yes, Director Oglesby.
I believe that Director Morton should be able to participate through her cell phone. So that's just an option, you know, if we really need for her to comment or take a vote, she should be able to voice audio through the cell phone.
Okay. Does she know, do we know the number to have her call in? That's the.
She had a call-in number prior to the meeting, and actually she's been joining the meeting through that. And
okay.
To Mayor Oglesby's point, anybody can participate, any board member via phone or via video conference, but it has to be an audio delivered vote. In either way, it works.
And it sounds like if she's been participating using her cell phone, that's the problem, that she can't be heard. So that's unfortunate. But we now have completed 3 of our 4 business items. It is after 5 o'clock, so I would need a motion for us to continue. What I propose is that item 8D be continued to our regular special meeting next week for consideration, and that, oh, I see Kendall is waving her arms at me. I will recognize you then.
Thank you so much, Chair. What I would like to say is this, and I appreciate it. We think this, actually the staff's recommendation was going to be to move this to the 17th, but I would like to point out that several members of the board have provided comments based on the proposed 2020 transition plan update. I would encourage the other board members and or their legal teams to present or provide your comments by Monday of next week, which will allow staff the opportunity to recirculate an updated version of this item for consideration for the board next Friday. The original package had the information out Friday of last week, so there's been ample time. Hopefully folks have a chance to look at that. If anyone has any questions, they can call me directly, but we are prepared to bring this to the board for the Friday April 17th meeting and hopefully be able to take some action at that time.
Great, thank you. And I see that Director Morton has her hand raised. Are you back?
I am back. I'm sorry, my phone line is a landline and it disconnected during the middle of that meeting. Very frustrating. But yes, my vote would have been, if I had the chance to vote, in favor. Thank you for your support.
There were 2 votes.
Right, good. So thank you and welcome back. So I would welcome a motion to continue just long enough to get general public comment, should there be any, and then adjourn until next Friday, the 17th. Is anyone willing to make that motion?
Cynthia's waving her hand.
Okay, I'm sorry, I can't see.
Sorry.
Okay, I see a hand raised via Zoom. Excellent.
A wave and a raise and Zoom raise. I move that we not continue, but place this item on the 17th agenda and stay in session only to hear public comment.
I'll second
Okay.
that. And
Great,
this
we
is
have
Director
a motion by Garfield, second by Hoffa. All those in favor, let's have a roll call vote, shall we?
Mayor Ian Oglesby,
Aye.
Supervisor Jane Parker,
Aye.
Supervisor Mary Adams,
Aye.
Supervisor John Phillips,
He gone.
Councilmember Frank O'Connell,
Aye.
Councilmember Alan Hoffa,
Aye.
Councilmember John Wizard,
Aye.
Mayor Joe Gunzer,
Aye.
Councilmember Janet Reimers,
Aye.
Councilmember John Gagliotti,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Gail Morton,
Aye.
Mayor Marianne Carbone,
Aye.
Councilmember Cynthia Garfield.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great, thank you very much. Now, if there is any member of the public who would like to comment on any item not on today's agenda and you are present in the Zoom meeting, please raise your Zoom hand and we will be able to give you 3 minutes to ask any questions or raise any issues you would like to speak about. And I'm not seeing any hands. Did we receive any public comment through just the general public comment portal that should be read into the record?
Don't think we received any emails.
No,
Okay.
just from Vicky.
Ah, all right, good, and we heard
We
that.
heard that. Yep.
So excellent. Good. Well, thank you, everyone. Good discussion. We will see you next Friday at 1 o'clock, and we are adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
all.
you.
Thank
Stay
you.
healthy.
Great meeting, Chair.
Thank you.